right, peace. Welcome back to another Dark Warrior Perspective book review. Of course, you already know by now. I'd like to apologize. I know it's been a while since we've gone over some books, but with no further ado, let's get this in. All right, so book number one. We've gone down this path before. I apologize, but this book holds so much substantial information regarding the subject matter about the Moors, or the Blackamoors. We had to revisit it. So we're going to go back to The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. If you go to page 207, whoever has this book is on page 207. If you don't have the book, well, that's what we're here for. If you go to page 207, it states that now again, just who were the Moors? And he writes, the answer is very easy. The original Moors, like the original Egyptians, were black Africans. As an aggregation became more and more widespread, only the Berbers, Arabs, and colors in the Moroccan territories were called Moors, while the darkest and black-skinned Africans were called Blackamoors. Eventually, black was dropped from Blackamoor. In North Africa and Morocco, in particular, all Muslim Arabs, mixed breeds, and Berbers are readily regarded as Moors. The African blacks, having had even this name taken from them, must contend for recognition as Moors. So, Chancellor Williams, I know I've told you guys about this book before, but you got to get this book. This is one of the books that I want you to get into the subject matter about the Blackamoors. So that's book number one to help you in finding out who these people truly were. All right? All right, book number two, The Golden Age of the Moors. This was edited by Ivan Van Sertima. All right, this is a very good book that you need to add on your shelf regarding the description of the Moors. We didn't even have to go that far in his book. We could just go to page number 7. In the second paragraph, where he states that during the European Renaissance, explorers, writers, and scholars began to apply the term Moor to blacks in general. A prominent example of this tendency can be found in the work of Richard Hakluyt. He was a 15th century traveler, and Hakluyt recorded that in old times, the people of Africa were called Ethiops or Negrita, which we now call Moors, Moorines, or Negroes. In the Romance languages, Spanish, French, and Italian of medieval Europe, Moor was translated as Mora, Moir, or Moor. Derivatives of the word Moor may be found even today in these same languages. In Spanish, for an example, the word for blackberry is mora, a noun which originally meant Moorish woman. Also in Spanish, the adjective for dark complexion, which now means brunette, is morena. We found a similar legacy in the French language. In French, Morica means dark skin or black Moor. So as you can see, which I've had to keep trying to reiterate with a lot of people who want to call themselves Moor, and they don't want to call themselves African of some sort. They keep trying to express the fact that Moor doesn't mean black. Well, that's why we're going to do this book review. Book number 2, The Golden Age of the Moors. This is going to get into a deep description of the origin of the word Moor itself and why it does mean black when it came to anyone who wasn't of African descent. All right, book number 3. If you can recall, myself and a good brother of mine, Antonio Fly, did a book review on the history of Africa, Volume 1 and Volume 2. In one of the chapters in Volume 2, it was a chapter entitled "The Times of Trouble" by Dr. John Henry Clarke. I have the book in my hand right here. All right. If we turn to page 353, "The Times of Trouble" by Dr. John Henry Clarke, he too expressed who the Moors were and how Islam began coming into Africa. If you go to page 356, he says, "In the meantime, Islam had moved deeper into Africa. The Arabs' language and religion brought together a large number of peoples and cultures that had not previously related one to another. When the second wave of North African merchants reached the Western Sudan about the year 1000 AD, they found flourishing kingdoms that had already been influenced by Islam. The commercial relations they established were lasted for more than 500 years despite continuing conflict." All right? He says the Africans south of the Sahara made a rallying cry and around Islam, and in large numbers began to prey on the nations of West Africa and the Niger area. All right? Accusing the people of not properly observing the faith of Islam. All right? So as you can see, he's telling you in brief that there is a heavily influence of Islam going into West Africa. Many Africans converted to Islam, and there was some bickering about who is practicing Islam better than others. But this is where I'm trying to get at to support the article that I just finished reading to you about the Blackamoors. There was a particular group called what? The Almoravians, who derived their name from the Arab al-Mirabitin, meaning members of the Rabet, a kind of militarized convent. The Almoravians were started by Ibn Yassin, head of a tough warlike family from where? Senegal. Senegal being West Africa. That's where they originated from. All right? So they were a group of people who had taken on Islam, and they were the group of people coming out of West Africa, Senegal, and they were part of the group of people who were later on assisting the Arabs and their influence in Spain. All right? I'm not going to go too far into this because I want you to buy the book and I want you to read it. Volumes 1, Volumes 2, the history of what? Africa. And this particular chapter was written by Dr. John Henry Clarke, The Times of Trouble. Get that book. All right, book number 4. The Story of the Moors in Spain. This was by Stanley Lane Poole, okay? This book right here, if you go to page 178, he writes in a brief insert, "A new Berber revolution had taken place in North Africa, and a sect of fanatics called the Marabouts, or Saints, Aboriginals, as the Spaniards named them, had conquered the whole country from Algiers to Senegal." Because remember, the Almoravians come out of Senegal, West Africa. And then he says, there were much the same sort of people as Tariq and his followers, and they were ready enough to cross the waters and conquer the fertile provinces of Spain. Who does he mean by Tariq? General Tariq, who led the Africans into Spain to conquer Spain on behalf of the Arabs, controlling Spain for the next 800 years. Please, the Moors of Spain by Mr. Poole himself. Get this book ASAP. All right, book number 5, Islam's Black Slaves. The reason why I'm introducing this book to you is not so much to go over the atrocity of how Islam enslaved the black African, but there's one particular chapter or paragraph of chapter 6 that I want to read to you. And it goes like this. In the beginning of the 8th century, Islam's conquest had spread westward across Africa, north of the Sahara. And by the late 8th century, caravans from the north were regularly crossing the desert to trade with black Africa. Any military invasion there in the cause of Islam, however, was avoided until 1062. The Moroccan-based Almoravids set out to subjugate the kingdom of Ghana in the western Sudan. They met with such resistance that it was only in 1076 that they succeeded in taking and plundering the capital of the kingdom. And by the beginning of the 12th century, the conquerors had lost the last remnants of direct control. Meanwhile, the king and the people had become Muslims, and they remained so after Ghana successively asserted its independence. Another book that I want you to add to your shelf to show that Africans were slowly converting to the new religion of Islam. And the Almoravids, who we know is coming out of synagogue, was a militant group because Dr. John Henry Clark just finished telling us this. They were nothing more, the word or the terminology in which we keep using is describing the complexion of the people. All right? Add this book to your shelf. All right, so last but not least, the cherry on top. But because it took me so long to produce this book review, I'm going to give you 2 cherries on top, all right? Because I got a heart. All right, so the first cherry I'm going to present to you is the history of Islam in Africa. The reason why I'm introducing some of these books to you is because these are the building blocks of you understanding the identity of Moors. All right, and how they were being labeled. Because as Islam began to transverse into Africa, and many of the converts to Islam were of African descent, then the description of those who were under the banner of both Islam and Christianity were being called Moors simply because it was the description of their complexion. All right, so this is the first cherry on top. This is going to give you a really nice detail of Islam from east to west, from north to south of Islam, and how it was converting many Africans into the ideology or the religion of Islam. And they led the revolt into the Iberian Peninsula, which we call Spain, under the leadership of Tariq, who was a converted African under Muslim rule. All right, first cherry on top. The last cherry, or the second cherry on top, is the Arab invasion of Egypt. You have to have this book on your shelf because this book right here, it says the Arab invasion of Egypt and the last 30 years of the Roman dominion. This is towards the end of the Hellenistic period in which the Romans and the Greeks were in control of Egypt. They were under the rulership of Justinian I and Ptolemy I, and they were beginning to change the identity and the complexion of the Africans there. Once the Arabs come in under the banner of Islam, they run the Romans out, and they plant their flag of Islam in Egypt, or what we call Kemet. They start building their masjids. They start selling off many of the ruins. They start destroying many of the idols, because in Islam, idolatry is really forbidden. All of these things was taking place. And so now the people that you see in the northeast corner of Africa, in which you call Egyptians, are Arabs who had taken over the land masses that was built on by early black Africans.